Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I am here today to do sort of an overview of quite a few things. And so hopefully this is going to work out and it's going to all make sense. Basically, I'm finding that a lot of people out there are seeing little pockets of information, but they're not connecting a big picture to it. And partly because of the kind of work I do, investigative reporting, and also connecting witness testimony around the world and over 17 years, that when new information comes in, I can bring it into this sort of grid framework, and it triggers new sort of associations and relationships in the material such that I want to communicate it to you and let you know where I'm going with all of it, what I see, and then maybe we can continue a dialogue that begins to expand beyond just individual pieces of information and get a bigger, more cohesive sense of what's really going on. So okay, so I'm just going to go down this list of sort of topics that I've gathered together, and then I'll go drill down into each one with some explanation. So first of all, what I want to talk about is the role of Basel, Switzerland, and the control of what is called the right to issue, and why it's centered in Basel, Switzerland. And as far as I can tell, there's very little talk about this, at least in the circles that I pay attention to. And I'm always gathering more and more information. So I have a whistleblower on the subject who is very well versed and trained as part of this monetary system that we've had, that involves Wall Street, stocks, and all kinds of things. They have had training in this area, and they have recently communicated to me that there's, I believe they said 10,000 acres where there are a certain group of families. I got a download as to the various ET races that are interacting and controlling the monetary system on Earth recently. And so I wanted to wrap that into that understanding of the right to issue, the fact that we've got kind of two sides of the same bird, which involves, in essence, what we call kind of the right and the left in the United States, but it's really worldwide. And we're talking about, the United States, in theory, democracy, and Trump, and so on, and the Q and the white hats, and on the one hand, and then we've got the New World Order globalists on the other, that does involve the CCP and communism. So if you want to split it kind of simply that way, understanding that both sides have to, if you will, either participate or bow down or take orders from the Basel, Switzerland group, because they are the ones that control the monetary system, but they are the human element that live in this particular area of Switzerland. I imagine they live in other places as well around the world, but this is a concentration. There's a group of ET races that seem to be vying for control and keeping control over the monetary system. So first of all, there are the reptilian Dracos. So I put them more or less in the same bucket, and the grays around, the grays out there, the various gray races report to the reptilians and the Draco. And then we've got those beings from Aldebaran that are, from what I understand, humanoid and might actually be reptilian humanoid hybrids. Then there's the Anunnaki that are Pleiadian humanoid reptilian hybrids. And certainly there can be more. For example, the beings from Venus, which whether they're Pleiadian or not, or all go back to Lyra. So my understanding is the humanoid races tend to go back, all stem from Lyra, the Lyra system, but they could also have originated in other parts of the multiverse. And I know there's a concentration. And then also there are the beings coming and going from Venus. So these are the main, from what I can tell, ET races that are trying to control our monetary system and vying for control of Earth. And therefore, they're also sort of interacting with certain of the beings, human beings, here on Earth, and in some cases influencing them, in some cases temporarily taking them over to do certain activities, and so on. So this is the playing field we're looking at, I believe, at the moment. Now, there is a whole situation, and a lot of this, in order to understand what I'm really saying here, it's best to go back to the William Tompkins interview I did, which is a 3-hour interview in which he explains how the Nazis from Paperclip got involved in our secret space program, how the beings from Aldebaran influenced Maria Orsic and the Nazis and gave them technology during World War II, how that morphed into the end of World War II and the Nazis coming to the US, the reptilians influencing our secret space program and in some cases sabotaging it, which Tompkins talks about quite a bit, and also the Pleiadians directly interacting with our secret space program and aiding the Americans in the development to get them where they are today, which involves Space Force and so on. So that's a very complex story. And these are the kind of major markers that we have to keep in mind when looking at the playing field that we're dealing with here out there. So I also want to highlight an interesting story having to do with Gordon Duff, who is a senior editor over at Veterans Today and has from time to time told the truth and in print on Veterans Today. I did have 1 or 2 conversations with him quite a long time ago. I've been watching his, information and so forth. And I also was in contact with another whistleblower on the same subject that I'm going to talk about here, that basically Gordon Duff talked about. I have, it turns out to be 3 other very substantial whistleblowers. One is Captain Mark Richards. The other is a very long time contact of Project Camelot. And the other is this other whistleblower who brought forward important information on the subject. And the subject is how it's actually based on, there's a movie, and I've talked about this before, so those of you out there who follow my work might know what I'm talking about. But it centers around a television series called The Event, which is actually a depiction of a real situation that we're having here on planet Earth to do with various ET races, and those, but specifically the race from Aldebaran. The story goes that the race from Aldebaran destroyed what I understand to be not just 1 planet of theirs in their system, but 2. And they got into a situation where they wanted to come to Earth and basically terraform and take over a certain portion of our territory. And that a negotiation took place so that we could go into outer space and take over certain planetoids or planets where we could establish colonies with their help. And that at the same time, they would be given a portion of our landmass, which was Africa. So I know this sounds crazy to a lot of people out there, but this is actually something that Gordon Duff talked about on Veterans Today many years ago. And Gordon Duff, being CIA, is often lying. I mean, he's often misleading the public in various ways. The entire Veterans Today is run by the CIA. So sometimes they tell the truth and sometimes they lie. And it's a huge combination of that. So, you really have to use discernment if you bother to read that very interesting publication, which I do encourage people to do. And they have some wonderful writers for them. And people will know that Michael Shrimpton, the former barrister that I've interviewed many times, writes for them or has in the past. And there's another fascinating writer whose name I'm not going to say, but he used to write for them, and he wrote many in-depth articles about our dealings with various ET races and what was going on here on the planet with regard to the secret space program. So he's a very knowledgeable guy as well. So there are some very good columnists over there that I do encourage people to pay attention to. Now, the story goes that, again, we gave them Africa. This was against the wishes of some of the smaller countries out there. But because America is kind of like been given the reins of the major secret space program here on Earth, the only real competitor there is China, because America and Russia, Great Britain, France, and the Five Eyes are all together in our secret space program. So China has its own situation. India is actually aligned with us. So understanding the way Earth is being run currently and understanding what's happening and what has happened and deals that have been made with off-planet races going back at least 70 years and probably more than that. And since the 1930s at the very least, that we know about, okay, that have been coming forward and that various whistleblowers have told us about and various people out there. Now, one of the things to keep in mind also is my witness, Captain Mark Richards, talks about a UN kind of organization that is part of the UN, but it's a secret part, has been making deals with various ET races unbeknownst to the rest of us and having meetings here on Earth. And he has talked about this in the past. I've talked about it. And actually Dan Burish has talked about it, and a few other people, but not many. But they are meetings that take place here on the planet, and it involves places like Exeter in England is one of the main meeting places. There's another place in, I think it's Peru, where they often meet, and so on. So there are these centers where various ET races can come, all for this particular meeting, and it will involve off-planet races, and some of which will be ones that you might have never heard of course. And then it appears that also Antarctica is the most off-the-grid landmass on the planet, and that is also another main ET off-planet race meeting place, okay? So to get back to the Aldebaran story, is the story as we were told by a whistleblower that has been substantiated again by at least 3 other substantial sources, including Gordon Duff, is that the beings from Aldebaran expressed they wanted to come here. We gave them this landmass. They have disguised themselves. They have some kind of ability. They do look, the normal sort of blonde, blue-eyed, I don't know what you want to call that, humanoid, even you might call them the Nordic type of look, right, of a typical Nazi, but they seem to be able to change their appearance. And so what they did is they camouflaged themselves. They turned their skin dark, more, like black type, the black races, to blend in with the races of Africa. They were flown in to bases that are very hidden and often where, and for example, the the gold is taken on and off the planet by to deliver to the Anunnaki in these South African hidden bases. This is a common knowledge. This has been going on for many, many decades, and so on. So these same bases then became sort of a place, a distribution place, where these races from Aldebaran, these beings who again were kind of like refugees from another planet, coming into Africa, families, etc., and then dropped off in South Africa, where this particular whistleblower actually told us that what happened was they began to see all of a sudden that they had populations that they, in numbers that they never knew where they came from. And they appeared kind of out of nowhere in the immigration record, I guess. And then they would take trains and leave South Africa and go into the rest of Africa and establish themselves. And because they looked like the peoples of Africa, they got under the radar. And they established bases, both underground, and were also given places to live, etc., in Africa. I don't know what the actual number of these beings are. I do know that it's very possible, but that what they're calling Ebola is actually, could be our reaction to, or sort of a disinfo campaign to keep people away from the interior of Africa. And so to keep these, this race hidden, for the one thing. But there's also sort of a catch, which is that although they look human, what is the situation is that, and this is in the movie The Event, which is a series you can watch on Netflix and also I think Amazon, or it used to be free. Towards the end, it is revealed that although they're humanoid or look very human, they actually need a different atmosphere than us, and that the exposure of us to them alters our DNA, or actually, can act as a kind of poison to us, which is possibly reflected in a disinfo campaign that they call Ebola. Now, it's well known that Ebola was actually an ingredient, or is an ingredient, of the vaxes. So this story that I'm telling now does reflect back into the whole COVID last 2 years, which is what I've said over and over again, a transhuman agenda with basically collateral damage, where they don't care how many people can't handle the change. They're trying to change our genome. Now, having our genome changed is something that the Anunnaki were involved with all those years ago, around the time, even when they were there, as well as eventually all the books of the Bible reflecting, possibly even controlled by at least the Anunnaki. So at that time, there's the whole Enki-Enlil story, the idea that Enki was given Africa and Enlil was given the Middle East. The Middle East was, Enlil was more totalitarian and wanted more humans to be more taking orders and administrative, and Enki mating with the human females, and that's how it's depicted, although it may just be a genetic experiment in which he gave his genetics to the humans in that area. And then they were given in essence, they had an activation of what is part of the genome, which is this rebel gene, and allowed to have more freedom. So this kind of rolls out many years later, and we see that we have sort of, if you want to say it this way, that the humans, we all have rebel genes, but we all have the creative gene, we all have the God genes, whatever you want to call it, all these things, but some have it activated and others don't. And so some are more taking orders, obeying so-called authority in all its disguises here on earth, and others that rebel just by instinct from the minute they're born. So you may be one or the other, whoever's listening to this. You might have woken up only partway through your life and activated your more rebellious side, or had it activated through stress or through a lifetime experience that basically woke you up, etc. In my case, I was born that way. I was a rebel from a very young age and continue to be. So I question everything and continue to do so. Anyway, this story that I'm trying to tell here has to do with these beings from Aldebaran, again, who have been given Africa. And I know it sounds absurd, but this is what we were told. And I'm not sure how that impacts the races of Africa either. I do know that I've been to Africa. I've been to several of the countries, including Egypt, and I lead tours of Egypt in case you're not aware of that. And I can tell you that in places, certain parts of Africa, when I have been going there, you can definitely tell that the grid is not as strong. It's much weaker. And I'm sure that's intentional. And you can definitely tell if you're out, for example, on safari, etc. Now, I do want to say that, so there is this ongoing relationship with various ET races that the New World Order is all about controlling. And they want to control, of course, the secret space program or programs around the world. And right now, it's centered in the United States, as I've said, with the opposite being China. And there are a different ET race that is dealing with China, a certain, I think, group of the Draco reptilians, or Dracos probably. And then we understand perhaps the spider beings and a few other type beings that the Chinese are being helped by, that they're being influenced by. So, and you've got, then you've got each ET, okay, every ET race that becomes a spacefaring race creates an AI. So then we also have at least 4 AIs that are influencing the Earth in circumstances right now that are not negative towards humans. So that's another thing that we're dealing with on top of our dealings with all these different ET races. Now, when you're looking at the New World Order and how they're working very hard right now, basically to take complete control of humanity, and especially our bodies, and even this Roe versus Wade, certain, resurfacing at this time, having to do with control again of our bodies, specifically of women, and the right to, give birth or not give birth, etc. So all of this is centered around the human body. So keep that in mind when we're going forward and talking about the transhuman agenda and why they want to so desperately to change us and make us into what is in essence a passive super soldier that takes orders, but has abilities to, do whatever it is they want us to do. And also basically what they're building is an army of beings to fight any incoming threat, especially androids coming from these other AIs and AI cultures out in the larger solar systems and galaxies. So this is a what I call a Humanity 3.0 program, and COVID is very much part of that. So the COVID situation was that they created a bioweapon that contains nanographene oxide, and spike proteins, a number of poisons, known poisons and viruses to stimulate an immune response in the person that gets jabbed. And being jabbed is part of, it's more or less, it's like the last step in this process. And the tests contain these same things. And we've actually got proof that the tests contain the graphene oxide, the nanographene oxide. Now, I've interviewed a person that I've talked about before, a Dr. David Adair, who the last interview I did with him, he described nanographene oxide as the building blocks for changing your the structure of the cell and bringing in these other poisons, etc., as well as these packages of turning you into, I guess it's a spike protein manufacturing site, and then going through your body and changing the cell structure as well as the rest of you, and including the brain, and connecting you to the AI that's trying to run the world. And so all of this has been put out there. Now, it's been put out there before they started jabbing you with it. This is a very long program that even can be traced back to a very interesting situation that happened in the Falklands War and was manifested in the deaths, the very strange deaths of what began to be 25 Marconi scientists, and then it escalated, and I believe they say there's 80 such Marconi deaths, and they all ended up killing themselves, being infected by this black goo, which ends up to be very likely the nanographene oxide. And then it's a form of AI that is conscious and takes over the body, as I'm saying. And so this was found out to be what happened to the Marconi scientists. They covered it up, of course, but that's what the Falkland War was all about. And that black goo, or what we call that, turns into, microcosmic, even, nano-sized bots, little robots that are part of the AI. So you become infected by it. And people that have got the tests are also infected, but it's also in our food, our water, and has been for many, many years, and coming in through the chemtrails, okay? So it also manifested again, it resurfaced in what we call the Gulf oil spill, the major one. And in that situation, they said it was a spill, but that's not actually what happened. It was basically an emergence of this black goo. It's an black oil-like substance in the Gulf that began to eat the bottoms of boats. And so they put out this, they created what is in essence the spill. And then they put in Corexit trying to get rid of this, or stop the growth or the replication of these nano graphene oxide nanobots. That when the first thing you see is like, there's kind of like particles of it, and then basically they join up, they link up to create these strands, which have been photographed with micron, even a jeweler's microscope was what we used when we photographed through, and I'll put in a slide of that. So you can see what we photographed. And then what they do is they continue to grow and replicate once they're activated, and they form a lattice-like formation that then is very geometric and eventually would, in theory, fill your entire body and beneath the surface of the skin. And what it looks like, in essence, when you look at it, is a snake skin, interestingly enough. And so this may relate to the snake venom that they're also using as a stimulus to activate this stuff as part of the package. This bioweapon package that they've now delivered through injection to those willing participants, let's say. And I think it's important to realize that humans are psychic. You can understand that we are psychic because it's a part of our genome. And a lot of people have it turned off, but even the most dull instruments around us, if you want to call them that, can easily activate some of their psychic abilities. And that on a certain level, a higher soul level, these individuals are actually opting in to this program to become transhuman. Now, in many cases, the body can't handle it, and so they die. And what's important to know is that when you have an athlete, this stuff is activated by body temperature. So, and stress and the building of heat in the body turns it on. So it wakes up and begins replicating. It turns into creating a kind of a cytokine storm. And this has been documented that the graphene oxide creates a reaction in human beings, much like a flu or a cold kind of symptoms, making it hard to breathe. And as it replicates, especially with an athlete who is on the field and subject to a great deal of stress and revving their body up, in essence, this is why they're dropping dead in those circumstances. So fast forward to where we're at now is that this is a very successful rollout of a transhuman agenda that was started many, many years prior. You might say the last stage. There may be more rollouts of various bioweapons on top of it to do other things to enhance their transhuman agenda. I don't know, but it seems likely. And within this sort of package, they have discovered that there seems to be, certainly there's AIDS, but there's also Ebola is starting to be detected. And I would suggest that this race of Aldebaran beings that have now taken over maybe portions of Africa and are living there are also part of this overall agenda and may involve the terraforming of our atmosphere that started quite a long time ago. Because again, they're part reptilian, I believe. And reptilians and that genome prefers a methane-like radiation-filled environment. So hence we had a lot of radiation spills and supposed accidents such as Fukushima that affected the whole world and raised the radiation levels everywhere and continue to do so. As a matter of fact, there are other spills and things that we haven't been told about that I was told by a nuclear scientist happening, for example, in Eastern Europe. So just to be aware of that. So what I'm trying to do is paint a picture here that involves what's really going on in the bigger story. So as people are looking, to Trump and the White Hats on the one hand, and then the others that are following the New World Order, and thinking that that's it, that's the two factions, major factions at war with each other here on Earth. I just want to say that there is another level we're dealing with that involves interacting with these incoming races of ETs, positive and negative, on both sides of that spectrum, and deals that have been made with our Earth operating as a one world government, even though no one believes that we have a one world government, or at least people don't think that we do. And now more and more that one world government is coming to the fore. Their trouble is, of course, mainly the United States, because the United States is a rebel in that sense of not wanting to follow another race, another not wanting to follow in lockstep with what is in essence the CCP globalist New World Order agenda, and wanting, in essence, to lead it rather than to follow. And so this is where you get Trump coming forward, being backed, also off planet, to present an opposite point of view and to create a more, a whole different view of what would be a one world government eventually, but one that has freedom at the top of the list as being the most important, and human self-determination and all the good things that could result. So whether we like it or not, I'm kind of trying to make the point here, is this is already happening. It's not whether you want to be united as a world, but we're already becoming united as a world. And in the process, what is really the war of worlds taking place here in the United States is to determine what body of what group or groups is going to determine the path forward for the world in relation to our galactic brothers and sisters, if you want to call it that, and other worlds and AIs, and this incredible sort of mixture of realities that we're part of, including inner Earth races and groups that have kept themselves separate from the surface Earth people, as well as off planet and going interdimensional, and even beings that are interdimensional that don't manifest but still could interact, princes and principalities, if you want to call it that, using this old terminology. So now I have other things to talk about with regard to all of this, and I do want to also bring into the chain what happened to Max Spears and his death when he went to Cyprus, then came back and was dying. I was actually on the phone with one individual that was on the site there at the time. Apparently Max was dying in the other room. They were trying to call some help. Then doctors came but couldn't do anything. They left, and eventually they came back to take the body away, and they didn't allow them to take that body away. Instead, they spent several days trying to reanimate him, and possibly doing a lot of black magic rituals around that. And what he was dying of appears to have been a COVID infestation or takeover of his body, because there was black stuff coming out of various, his eyes and so on and so forth. So there's that aspect of something that happened, sort of a precursor of something that's going on here. There's also, of course, this link up having to do with the AI takeover of humanity, and again, our bodies. So we are being invaded from many different directions. Now, you may say that that's a pretty dark picture, but what's important to realize is that the reason this is happening is it's coming from a reaction to the raising of sort of elevated consciousness and the unification of humans here around the world. And so that as we rise and as we unite in this very high vibrational level, we are basically, in a sense, in the process of a kind of ascension. And in the process of ascending, we are leaving behind the more gross level, and that includes the Illuminati, who have chosen not to ascend, who have chosen materialistic reality and wanting to conquer Earth and other systems in this sort of 3D going into 4D, and stay there and keep us, or these human bodies, here and trying to take them over and turn them again into their cybernetic army, and then wanting to go out into the megaverse to take over cultures similar to the marauding reptilian Draco species. So that's the destiny, you might say, of the lower level Illuminati and what they have in mind for themselves. Eliminating populations is not as crucial for them, although they're certainly involved in it. And the Chinese very specifically. In fact, Mark Richards told me 2 years ago, before this whole thing started, that he had gotten word that the Chinese had decided they needed to get rid of at least 500 million or more of their own people. And they are still, as you see, doing lockdowns, probably spraying their people with this more versions of the bioweapon, making sure that more and more people die and don't just get transformed into this cybernetic type army. So we have that going on. So this is what's happening here on Earth. And we are, it's kind, I've used this example before, but we're like a beach ball that you push down into the water, try to hold it down, and it bounces up even higher. So this is what the dynamic going on here at Earth, on your Earth, with consciousness and with humans. And those watching this will be very much involved in this process. Those who don't see this, who aren't aware of the things I'm talking about, will probably be remaining behind, as you say, and possibly subjected to these different options of living on the Earth in this 3D reality that involves human suffering on all the different levels, etc. So when you see people opting in to get the jab, understand that on a certain level, assuming they survive it, they have opted in to be part of this drama that is going to involve a lot of AI control, and they're going to have to work to free themselves eventually. So that's the path they've chosen. It's a perfectly, decent choice for a being that doesn't want to ascend. So you might look at it that way. Now, I want to also give people an idea of something that's going on with regard to like this sudden emphasis on possible nuclear war. There are 3 installations that we were told about in Camelot many years ago. First of all, by Valery Uvarov, who was part of the FSB over in Russia. We went to Russia to interview Boriska, the boy from Mars, as he was called, who had total recall of his prior life, being a soldier on Mars. And he was telling people about that at a very young age, the age of like 11, 8, 9, 11, whatever. And we interviewed him. I think he was turning 12 at that time. He's now in his 20s, because this was many years ago. The interview is still available and is our most popular Project Camelot video ever. And it gets, used and published out there by other organizations. It pops up from time to time in the British media on mainstream, and it also is talked about in other countries and so on. In fact, recently, I think it showed up in Saudi Arabia. So there's an important sort of caveat to have to do with this nuclear war idea. That is that there are these 3 installations that we were told about that were established by an alien race many, many eons ago. And one is off the coast of Florida, one is in Russia, and one is in China. This is what we were told. And that these installations would repel any incoming large meteor or planetoid that was headed to Earth also, in theory, any weapon that was headed towards any of these land masses that could be shot down by this installation. And this is also to prevent an Atlantis, like a sinking of a landmass by a meteor or planetoid that was used as, like, they can use these things, shoot them through some kind of portal, even like use a neutron star to do such a thing, as Mark Richards has said in my interviews. You can also try to destroy another planet this way, and so on and so forth. So using it like a bowling ball, if you want to visualize it like that. Anyway, these installations are there to ensure that, you know, the Earth doesn't get destroyed in this way. And it also works for the nuclear weapons in theory. So it's just something to be aware of. Oh, I want to talk about briefly the co-evolution books by Alec Newald. There's this, there's another part of the black goo, you know, graphene oxide story that Alec Newald is sort of an ET contactee with these blue aliens. I believe he was living in, as far as I remember, I thought it was New Zealand, but I'd have to go back. I read his books many years ago, and he talks about an ET race. I'm not sure if it's the same race or whether the race just revealed the information, but they were aware of this negative level black goo that is, again, AI that was put here by an ET race to be activated at a certain point in our history, which obviously has happened by now and happened beginning in the Falklands. And that there is, so this is embedded in the earth, under the oceans, you know, and was always going to wake up and start to infiltrate our planet. Then supposedly there's another ET race that is trying to stop it, but it's obviously not being very successful at the moment. And then there is a version of that black goo or oil type substance that is supposedly even deeper in the earth that is positive. So there's more than one story regarding all of this, but I can recommend the Co-Evolution books by Alec Newald if you want to learn more about all of this. Again, this nanographene oxide, there's this aspect of the quantum that that has now emerged in our world is a very important aspect of, and it is sensitive and it does take orders from AI, but it also takes orders from us. So that if you understand that we have an intelligence, you might call it a divine intelligence or a link up to the divine intelligence, or you can have that, your higher self, etc. And you can actually, you know, command and direct what goes on with your body. Now, many people that don't meditate haven't got such a through line to this ability to command your body and to even command the world around you to a degree. And so that they haven't got as much protection against this nanographene oxide and then the bioweapon in general. But also keep in mind that every communication is a two-way street. So as AI can communicate with us, we can communicate with it, and we can generate scalar waves and send whatever comes at us back to the sender and deal with them in that way. We can also protect ourselves, etc. This ability for all the targeted individuals out there is what you're trying to develop by being targeted. So nothing just happens to you. You're not a victim. You're actually experiencing all of this to bring all of these gifts that we have as humans to the surface and to then activate them and utilize them. So this is the process of becoming, if you would, like the creator, okay? And that's basically the path of the humans. So this is worth knowing as you go into these sort of dark days, and understanding that we opted in for this experience to, let's say, challenge ourselves as souls, to put us into a situation that where the game is rigged, or appears to be rigged. But we have, for example, our own abilities and growing abilities. And as we band together and become more unified through consciousness, we are also growing more powerful. So we can change this world around us more and more easily. And you're seeing that in all the numbers of broadcasters that are out there speaking to and for the people. And the more unified we're becoming in our understanding of how important it is to maintain freedom and the dignity and the sovereignty of humanity in the face of all these odds and invasions and so on. So I want to say that there are a lot more biolabs than are being revealed, and that's important to know. So if you can look at biolabs as what they really are, which is ways they're concocting to change the human genome. This is a long-term project, as I've said. It's probably being, handled in many, many labs around the world, many of them even underground, in underground cities and bases. So those will never be revealed to the public, but they will continue to exist. So there's a great deal of what goes on, especially underground, that is not subject to any of the laws, rules, and regulations, Geneva Convention, call it what you will, that is taking place here on Earth, on the surface Earth. And of course, off planet in the various bases that we have on Mars, on the moons of Saturn, and going out into the multiverse is certainly not operating this way either. In fact, there are places where the rule and the totalitarian view of reality is fully in control of planets and planetoids that we are occupying. And there is a great trade in humans, not only humans coming into the planet, but humans being transported out as slaves, sex slaves for food and other types of slavery that is happening because of for example, CERN is a doorway and a portal that goes direct to the Draco constellation. And that is how very large reptilian ships are able to come and go. And they go to war-torn areas where there are refugees, and they basically scoop up these humans and take them off planet and barter with other races with them. So that whole trade in humans that goes on here on Earth is also happening off planet and interacting with our world. Again, another reason why understanding that whether you like it or not, we have a one world government, and we need to change that government to include us and our views of the way Earth really should run and bonding together to make sure this happens. Okay, I was also told to say that there are two countries that are not completely controlled by Basel, Switzerland, and that is Iran and Russia. And they are not, at least in terms of the right to issue, that they are not completely controlled. Now, why that is not clear. I know that Russia is working with us in the secret space program, regardless of how it looks on the surface Earth. The Russians are also working with a certain set group of ETs that apparently are more positive than they used to be, and that this version of Putin, who is in essence a clone, is not the original Putin, and it's a much more positive oriented being. and is working with Trump and the White Hats behind the scenes. And we're going to see where that all leads. I can say that there's also, there's a shield over Earth from 100,000 feet and above, beyond which conventional weapons and aircraft cannot go without permission. And that all of the low Earth orbit satellites, including the Project Leonid that I've talked about in the past, that involves nano satellites, so nano-sized satellites that are linked in a grid, an AI grid, and report to a major sort of craft called, they call nickname Mother, is fully operational. That's not including the whole Starlink grid that Elon Musk is involved in. Now, I'm not sure if I've mentioned, but Elon Musk is, okay, so I have my own take on him. And my understanding, what I was seeing was a cyborg. I believe he's run by a good set of, whether it's an AI or a group of ETs, I don't know, but for the most part, he seems fairly positively oriented. But he did grow up and was totally backed by our secret space program during the time when it was completely run and dominated by the New World Order. So he has been positioned purposely to be playing his role that he's playing now. Whether he's turned against his sort of operators, or whether he is actually fulfilling a role that they prefer he play, and where that might lead, I don't know. I do know that I was told that, first of all, there's a very well-known, excellent remote viewer called Dick Aldebaran, who I've interviewed a few times, so you can look up his name on Camelot. He used to actually be working with Courtney Brown and his group of remote viewers. Then they had a parting of the ways. Since then, Dick Aldebaran has been more or less concentrating on predicting currencies, but I think he's also involved in a group that you can participate in that has to do with sort of looking at world events and so on and so forth. He has also made a drawing, and I'll put it here, showing what he has seen with regard to Elon Musk, which matches my own sort of vision of Musk, strangely. And so there may be some validation there. I don't know how aware Elon is of what he actually is or not. So I don't, I'm not trying to insult him, but this is what, you can't help what you see. So then on top of it, someone wrote to me and said that there was a book written, I don't know if they said 100 years ago or whenever it was, that depicted a character called Elon, who would eventually be made president of Mars. And so I don't have a copy of that book, but this is what I heard. You can investigate and see if you can find it. That's quite fascinating. I do want to recommend my Awake and Aware presentation that I made in the summer in July that talks a lot about some of these things I'm talking about here now, and shows evidence of the nanographene oxide being already put into the food and the agriculture and the water and so on and so forth, and various processed foods, etc. So that we've already been ingesting this, we've been drinking it, etc., to, I guess, acclimate our body to having this nano in us. But it's also true that we, when you're healthy and you have a good immune system, you naturally shed or, get rid of a lot of the excess graphene oxide in your system naturally. So that's why they had to resort to this bioweapon where you would be injected, and that would basically be a takeover scenario once and for all. Okay, so I think I've covered most of the things I wanted to talk about today. There are probably more things that I didn't remember to talk about, so I may be making another video soon. If you find this interesting, please do feel free to write to me at Kerry@projectcamelot.tv. And I hope that you will share this video with others who have a more short-sighted view of the world and our future, and also understand that the White Hats are an organization that really do exist. They are part of what is the Trump effort to sort of turn this ship around into a much better world, and that they need a lot of help. They need us to help them and to also help guide them. So they are using, as 107 says, one of their main spokespeople, who is JFK Jr. and is going to come forward eventually. I hope you find this valuable and in looking towards the future, and please do watch my videos. I've got over really thousands of video interviews. All of them are still relevant because in the early days, we had whistleblowers that were basically telling us what was coming in the future, suggesting ways to deal with it, etc. So every Camelot video that I've been involved with has been worthwhile. I cannot testify as to the truth in every one because a lot of whistleblowers tell the truth and do package it with some disinfo. So that's almost inevitable when you're dealing with a whistleblower and you're dealing with the world that we're dealing with here. So they are trying to protect themselves, their families, their friends, loved ones, and so on. So keep that in mind when you're watching the videos, and use discernment always. Question everything and do your own research. And thank you. Question everything and do your own research. And thank you again for watching.